Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Something Something podcast. My name is Eric Kasloff, and with me, as always, is Larry Sands. How's it going, Larry?
Everything is good, Eric. Everything is good. Sometimes you just kind of hit a wall. And I think because been working a lot on our movie and stuff. And do you wanna let people know what's going on with it?
Yeah, we have our composer, and pretty much we
Yay!
are closer and closer to this thing being done. And we don't want to say his name yet till we have him on the show,
No.
but
Yeah.
he is a super awesome guy. I can't wait for
Yes.
everyone to meet him. And yeah, man, this thing is closer and closer to being done.
I think that's one of the things too is I know that it's in the final stages of actually being done. And I mean, we put a lot into this, Eric. A little bit of
Yeah,
money, obviously, heart and soul and
sweat and a lot of
creativity.
tears.
That's right. That's
For
right.
when
That's
we
right.
first started it, I had to go on anti-anxiety medication for a while. Um, I started, no,
Uh,
this is, and these parts aren't a joke. I really did learn that I really, really like whiskey and cigars while doing this. Like a lot, like a whole
are you
bunch.
still doing the whiskey? I know you're doing
Act
the cigars, but are you still
Actually,
doing
last
whiskey?
night I drank this really good peanut butter whiskey called Sheepdog.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really good. I highly recommend it if you like whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I think filmmakers or creative people, whether you are a musician or a filmmaker, author, I think they kind of celebrate and the end of things and the beginning of new things. It's kind of like a bittersweet thing, I think. You know?
Yeah.
Um,
So
I don't know.
Larry,
Just
speak.
feeling nostalgic. We're almost done.
Yeah,
So
man.
yeah.
It's so Larry, speaking of authors, we have an
Yeah.
amazing guest on today, and I was looking over the playlist for his book. Now, I used to live in Lodi, New Jersey. Huge Misfits fan.
Mm-hmm.
Have a Misfits t-shirt. You can't go a step in Lodi, New Jersey without seeing Misfit stuff. The old candy store there had Misfit stuff, Lodi Pizza. So when I look through the playlist for our guest book, I see Misfits, Minor Threat, Fugazi, H2O. How many people remember the New York City hardcore band H2O? Probably just me and my guest, and a bunch of other people with
That's
back
right.
problems now.
That's right.
So, Larry,
I
introduce.
mean
I
that
think the first half of the show is just going to be him talking about music, I think. So,
I,
Larry,
I
introduce our
think
guest.
so. I think so. Well, our
Oh, and the
guest for this
Descendants.
episode, what Eric Magun, welcome to the show. You are not only an author, you're not only an award-winning author, award-winning filmmaker. So you got a lot of stuff going on, creativity wise, and I have a feeling that you have gained maybe some vices, maybe I don't know, from the end from the end of your films to the beginning and vice versa. We can talk about them, we cannot, or we don't have to. But either way, welcome to the show. I can't wait to talk about your new book, Thank God for Sinners, a Rick Price novel. But not only that, talk about your filmmaking and your playlist.
Absolutely.
What came first? Was it the playlist or
Well,
the book?
the book definitely came first. Although I have to tell you,
Okay.
my writing process is all about music. So like I
Oh.
do not write in silence. Silence is not my friend. It never was my friend. Um, and so I kind of approach writing the same way like a professional athlete handles before a big game. I got to get psyched up. I got to get that blood moving. I got to get my brain in gear. I got to get my body ready. And so a good healthy dose of Butthole Surfers and some
Yes.
Misfits and
Yes.
some Henry Rollins, just kind of scream it out. And then I kind of get onto that keyboard and I smack the hell out of it until I get out of my brain what I need to get out of my brain. So music is a big part of the book. It's a big part of my writing process. And really, I wanted to give the book a lot of depth. So, not just here's a great story, here's a great character. Every chapter is pretty insane. But I wanted to kind of look at it almost like, when I was younger and saw Tommy's The Who, uh, and the Who's Tommy rather, and was like, wow, there's an
Yeah.
actual rock opera amongst a great album, amongst a great movie, right? And how do we? That's like a
Mm,
trifecta, you know. And so I kind of did the real difficult step of not only writing a book, but then thinking, if each chapter was an ode to a punk rock anthem that I grew up and loved, what songs would those be, and how would those relate to the chapter? So again, the book came first, chapters were written, and then I had to kind of go through my brain and be like, okay, so what was the impetus behind that chapter? And what's a great song that would really be able to knock it out of the park so that people can not only read it, but they can relate to it, they can listen to it as well, kind of creating a multi-dimensional effect within the book itself. And that might go back to my early years of filmmaking and sort of putting together the whole picture, the music, the words, the
yeah.
visuals.
Yeah, the same with me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go as far as when I'm doing a script, I'm a big outliner. And when I do mini bios for my characters, and I'll think what music they like, what bands they like, so I can better understand them. And I was born in 81, so the late 90s and 2000s was my era. But when we did our movie, Hillsborough Road, it's set in the 80s. So when I
Ah,
was talking to the cast, I was like, this is what you would be listening to. This is what your character would be listening to. So yeah, music is such an
Yeah.
essential part, I think, for writing. I remember hearing how Stephen King even writes to music because it helps you understand it better. Because I'm pretty sure we can all look back and remember where we were the first time we heard a particular song that we love. Like my two of my favorite bands are Blink 182 and Fall Out Boy. And I
Hmm.
remember exactly where I was when I saw the music video for Damn It. And when you were able to put that into your writing, it helps the people reading it remember and they connect more to it because it makes it feel real instead of having this imagine. Oh, I love fake bands in movies. I love that. But there's something more real when it's an actual band you like being
yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
character of the book, Rick Price, like myself, kind of grew up as a punk rocker. So I grew up in '69, so I grew up in the '70s and the '80s in New York City, downtown. We had CBGBs, we had
Wow.
Maxes, we had all this incredible Webster Hall, this incredible music going on, this New York City hardcore scene that came about, such as with H2O and so forth, and Agnostic Front and
Yeah, I was
Cro-Mags
about to
and
say in Knox the Front.
yeah, yeah. And so we had this, incredible, society of music going on in New York. And it was started, of course, with all the classics, and then it moved into New York City hardcore. So I was a big byproduct of that era. And in my book, the character who is sort of like my my doppelganger to a degree, was also a punk rocker growing up. And so, throughout the entire story, you get his entire life, and the music is just become such a big part of who he is, why he's in some of the situations he's in, his reactions to things, how he handles himself, how he deals with confrontation, and all those things you just sort of learn, and witness, when you're in the kind of music scene, that had interested me, and still does. So yeah, I wanted to give the story a real musical root to it, a real influence towards not only the character but to the scenes. And so, yeah, it's super important, and I think it really helps tell the story.
And I tell you what, listening to you two writers talk about writing and being able to bring in your influences, obviously. And I mean, you've never nobody has ever made me want to write to beginning to start to look at write than this episode right here when you guys are talking about that because it's so interesting because you can as a writer, you get to dictate to everybody where you want them to go, the storyline. And when you if you do turn it into a film, even a screenwriter, it they you guys they you guys dictate where the story goes and the pacing and the emotional content. I have never been so more inspired by you two talking about writing and wishing I had, you know what? I'm a big believer in speaking things. I but this is so true. I don't know if I have the patience to write. I guess and let me ask you, Eric, and then Eric McGunn, and then you, Kazlov. Do you guys have patience when it comes to writing?
Well, I'll answer first. For me, writing
Yes.
is a necessity. I have
Mm,
to unleash the stories that are burning to be told within my soul and within my brain. I
mm,
just have that knack for telling stories, for wanting to get thoughts down onto paper. I've been doing it since I was, a child. Writing has always been catharsis for me. It's always been my outlet. And so it's there's definitely patience for it. It's definitely a necessity for my even for my own mental health. Just journaling in general. Um, but it is become a real important part of my life and always has been. Now, that's not to say that there's not times where you don't struggle over the writing. I'm not saying I can
right,
sit down
right. Yeah.
and all of a
Yeah.
sudden, magic just happens on the keyboard. There's a lot of grunting and a lot of cursing that happens along the way. And certainly, when you're sitting down trying to write a novel or a screenplay or anything else, there's just there's a lot of necessity to sort of get yourself into the mood, to get yourself to do it, to lock yourself into that room, to give yourself those hours, and to say, look, I'm not leaving here until something's being put onto the paper. And that just takes
Mm,
a lot of self-control and a lot of discipline. I mean, for me, the writing is more of it's a necessity,
yeah.
but it's also a discipline.
Yeah,
Wow.
you took the words right out of my mouth. Patience is a big thing because for me, writer's block is painful when you can't figure it out. It's like physically painful. And with me, it's the little, because again, I outline. I'll just try to think of a scene. I'll have my big scene, then I know what comes next. But I remember, man, for like 2 days, I couldn't figure out this little thing, in the middle, and it was just a quick little scene, a cutaway shot that more than likely will get edited out of the movie, but I had to know what happens next. And then when you start understanding that everything in your script has to make sense, or it's a waste of writing it. And where you have to make sure, because again, patience, because you got to understand the logic of your world. Like if you have werewolves in your script, are they ones that only become werewolves at the full moon? Are they anytime werewolves? And then you got to think what other supernatural thing exists in this world, because if it's just werewolves, that people are going to go, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, we'll believe werewolves exist, but they're the only supernatural creature in this world. That's stupid. See,
Yeah.
because right now you're all thinking, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and you're right, because when you do write, I mean, listen, you're taking the audience really on a blank canvas, right? And then you're saying, here, we're going to create a
Yeah.
story out of this, and even though it's a story and it's fictionalized, especially in my case, um, there still has to be this realm of truthfulness behind it. You can't just put something out there and then have people wonder, like that doesn't make sense. This didn't connect to that, this character went to here, and not over there. Because people they don't have anything except for what you've written. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you're covering all the bases, that you're dotting all the I's, you're crossing all the T's, you're thinking about things maybe a little bit outside of the normal realm of stuff because you want to make sure that everything is incorporated into the story because you don't want people to guess, and you don't want to kind of leave them hanging either. So you
Hmm.
have to really kind of go through that minutia of thinking about everything, like you said about the werewolves. Like, yes, you have a werewolf, but what type is it? When does it come out? Is it a male? Is it a
Yeah,
female? What is its name?
yeah,
What kind of history does it have?
yeah,
Did it have family? How did it get there? What ultimately
yeah,
happens?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, if you don't put that all into the book, then you leave your readers, asking those questions. And that could be difficult because it is easy to get lost in track somewhere and forget where you were before, and then you have to come back to it again. And it's an interesting process, and I agree with the same with you, Eric. I have notes everywhere. My writing room looks like a crime scene. It's like
This
post-its
is my
everywhere.
waiting
And
rooms.
I literally have, that quintessential rope going from this character to that scene over there. It's you have to kind of put it together. It's almost like putting together a mystery.
yeah, yeah. And it is kind of because obviously when you're doing a film, you're combining your writing, right, which is the non-visual, but then you're putting a visual to it. And obviously what you see, it's the spaces that you fill up in the movie, right? And I think because when I read, I don't necessarily often read, but when I do, I'm a slow reader and because I like to visualize, and I think that's part of it too, because I see your guys both points because if you let your audience mind kind of wonder and fill in the blanks when you're reading, they get lost, and when they pull back, they're like, wait, how did I just read a page and a half? And what was happening there? I don't understand. Is that just me?
No,
Is
No,
that like a weird thing?
no,
No?
not at
Okay.
all.
Okay.
And I had to be extra cautious with it as well because the way that I wrote this book is the book. It starts off in present day future with this, incredibly horrendous thing that has happened to this character. And you have no idea about this character, how he got there, why he's involved with this horrendous activity that has gone on. And then I kind of jump back, into this character's entire life, literally from birth, but I don't go birth,
Yeah.
early childhood, middle school, high school, but I'm kind of skipping all over the place here. So, and I'm
Yeah.
doing it all, it all kind of makes sense, but you have to be very cautious of the fact that you don't want to lose the reader either. I don't want to be like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
where am I now? I was just over
Yep.
here and now I'm over here.
Yep.
So, it
Yep.
it
Yep.
takes some careful consideration.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. Actually, let's talk about the book. Because thank God for the sinners. That, I mean, that's how did you come up with that? Because that's a really great title.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to take full credit for it. One of my favorite musicians, as of lately, is a gentleman by the name of Ty Segall, and it's Ty Segall. Ty Segall, man, is very musically prolific, and one of his albums was called "Thank God for the Sinners," and I just said to myself, "Wow, that is a great album
Yeah.
name." But for my book, it totally reflects everything that goes on in the book. My character, he's tremendously flawed. This is a man that's riddled with layers and layers and years of traumatic scar tissue. He is his own worst enemy, and he has had a horrendous traumatic life. And it just so happens that as he gets older, he becomes this sort of overseas business executive who is also a clandestine double operative for both China and the US. So he's got this incredible high pressure job, this incredible high pressure world of being a clandestine spy at the same time. He's got a doting family at home, and he's involved with so many things. And then he's got his own mental illness that kind of interferes all his decision making processes, and a horrendous thing will happen to him, and he gets caught up into this vicious cycle of trying to survive and protect his innocence. And it's very difficult for him to do with the kind of background that he's had. So I want to show all of those levels there. So it is a complex character, and the people that he meets and the things that he does is, going back to the sinner's route is, again, he's a sinner. Everybody's a sinner to their own degree. We all know that. Nobody is perfect.
Oh yeah.
I think in today's day and age, everybody's striving to show some level of perfection, right? The social media, how
Yeah.
many likes, how many views, everybody's got this idealism of perfection today, and they want to share it with each other, and
Yeah.
that's just way, first of all, that's not punk rock. Second of
Right.
all,
Right. Right.
that's not reality. The
Right.
reality is we are sinners, and let's embrace that part of us. That's the part that makes us different. That's the part that makes us exciting. That's the part that keeps things interesting. That's the part that keeps creativity flowing. And to me, it's like, let's celebrate this. Let's not hide this, and let's take these tragic characters that are almost like anti-heroes and say, you know what, I could relate to that because
Yeah.
there's a lot of realism there. I mean, nobody is perfect. I always say, everybody has skeletons in their closet, right? Just
Yeah.
happens that this Rick Price character's got like a catacomb in his closet.
Let's talk about Rick Price
Yeah.
because how did you is this book part of a series?
Yeah, great question. This book is definitely part of a series. The first book, so it's a Rick Price is my main character. It's a Rick Price series. First book, Thank God for the Sinners. I'm already halfway done with my second book, which is called Thank God for the Drugs, which will take Rick Price on another adventure, and then the third one will be Thank God for something else, and thank God. So there always will be that Thank God in the series. So always have this incredibly flawed character who's this, the scene stealer and everything. Um, and quite frankly, I spent 30 plus years overseas as an executive as well. And so, a lot of these after my film career, I kind of joined the executive world and went overseas to live in Southeast Asia and China. So I'm talking about from the early 90s all the way up into almost a couple of years ago. So I've had
Wow.
all of these incredible experiences, all of these volatile times in these third world emerging countries, trying to get business done, seen a lot of corruption, seen a lot of the shady side to things, a lot of situations that were uncomfortable health wise, safety wise. And just, and just accumulated a lot of these stories and said, look, I got all these great stories. Either I've experienced them myself, or I've heard about them, or read about them, or I've seen them. And so let's get this down and kind of take the reader to faraway lands that they never knew existed, put them in incredible situations that they could never have possibly imagined, and then do it with a lot of superlative description so that people can really feel as if they're there. Because I'm really all bringing them to places that are real and have been real. It's just not anything that anybody has really thought about before. And and then just kind of put that out there. And then I wanted to make a character that was going through all of these different situations overseas, handling his work job, and then kind of layer him up with, well, what if he's also a secret agent, for the US and China, besides his normal executive job of trying to get things made and done overseas and sold over here in the US. He's also involved in some nefarious situations going on between the governments, riddle them up with a whole bunch of anxiety and depression and anger and punk rock realism there, and then put him in an unbelievable situation. In this particular book, in the first chapter, you'll find out he's, yeah, a prostitute dies in his hotel room in China, and this character now has got, the stress of his job, his family, being a spy, and now having a dead prostitute in a part of the world where there is no justice. There is no
Mm.
justice. There is no law and order, And so now, what does this character do? How does he survive? How does he protect his innocence? How does he save his soul? So far away from home and involved in so many things. How does this whole thing come about? How complex can we make this situation so that people go, oh my God, like this is incredible. And a lot of that came from my time overseas, thinking to myself, geez, what if something really terrible happened to me? What would I do? And forget about it if it, was guilty of doing it or not. it's just what happens to you, what do you do, and especially in countries like China or the Philippines and places where, there isn't such a just system, legal system. How does one survive?
Mm.
And so I really wanted to give this character just a lot of that sort of chaos. And
Yeah.
so it really starts off, the book starts off in chaos, and then every chapter is its own chaos. Literally every chapter is chaos that this
Wow.
character is in, from the time that he's born into where he's at. And so it's a wild, wild ride. Like they say, buckle up your seatbelts. People have told me that they've compared it to like a Tarantino meets Bukowski on an Anthony Bourdain trip.
That's what it sounds
Um,
like. Yeah.
yeah, so it's got a lot there for everybody, but it doesn't hold back. I haven't held back, kind of true, I guess, to the punk rock realism. I haven't held back any punches. I let it all hang out, and I go places that are uncomfortable, that are dark, that are gritty, that can put you on in uneasy moments. I don't hide things to kind of gloss them over and give them kind of a happy ending. Um, unless of course the character asks for a happy ending. That's a whole different story.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. Would it be safe to say, because you know what they always say, truth is stranger than fiction, and it almost sounds like, you brought a lot of your experiences into this, and I don't know, you may be like a spy, I don't know, but is that, could that be said for your book? Truth is stranger than fiction in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that people resonate the most with, because there is a book here that's so unbelievable, but at the same time it's so believable.
Yeah,
You can understand why this is all going on. And yes, the character's a little bit, above board or overboard than you normally would expect, but people get put in uncompromising and uncomfortable positions throughout life,
yeah,
and it all is a question of how you deal with them. And so if you're talking about a character who's dealing with uncomfortable situations, but also has, trouble making good decisions, that just takes the whole pulse right up, as to what's gonna, because then you never know what's gonna happen next. It just
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
keeps you always guessing.
Wow.
Um, and that's how I wanted this story to go. So it reads fast. It's frenetic. It's just like punk rock music. It keeps assaulting, assaulting, assaulting,
Wow.
assaulting, 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 but also makes you think,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
really what I wanted to do at the very end of it was, have people finish the story and then think about it for a while, think about the character, think about it, think about themselves and what maybe some of the things they might relate to that character, think about themselves and how they're not related to that character, you know. But
yeah.
really, I wanted to make it an unbelievable story, but believable. So yes, truth stranger than fiction, absolutely. Some of the best stories are the truest ones.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Exactly. How long did it take you to write it?
It took me a good 4 or 5 years to write it, and I think that's with most first-time novelists, because we don't have an opportunity to do it full time,
Right, right,
and
yeah.
so you're doing it whenever you can do it, and that's a difficult process. And then the process of writing the books and getting it out there and publishing and everything else that goes with it, it's a very time-consuming effort.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you know, and so yeah, it takes some time, especially when you're writing something that's complicated and overtly trying to create unease and tension.
yeah,
It
yeah.
takes a bit of deliberate time.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And I mean, when we were talking at the top of the show, I mean, you do a lot of research, I think, and a lot of backstory because again, that's part of being a writer, and I think that's what good writers do. Um, and I mean, is that what part of that? Okay, I know this is a crazy question, and Eric, maybe you can help me figure my
Okay.
question out. But it's almost like because you do the research, and do you figure and everybody at home can't see what I'm doing is circling the little push pin and taking your string to the other picture. That all comes into play. But do you write at the same time that you're trying to figure everything out?
it's an interesting, I think everybody has their own process, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
For me, there's a lot of times where, and Eric, you might have a similar thing where you'll have a great idea and and you just want to get that down on paper first. You don't want to forget it, and it's something that's remarkable in itself. And maybe you don't know how it fits yet, but you know that it's going to be great
It's
if you could
going
just figure
to,
out how,
yeah.
yeah, it's going to, if you get it to fit, it's going to be great, without being forced. But you don't want to forget it either. So there's a lot of times that that will happen. And then there's other times where I've got a cast of characters and I'm trying to understand, how they intertwine and play with each other. And then for this particular book, because I go into this character's history, I have to be real cognizant of, the leaps of time that happen between each one of those chapters, so that I don't lose the reader as well. And so it's a bit of a dance to answer that question. And I don't think anybody has one particular way or the other. But I do know that when there's a good thought, it's best to get that down immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with me, because again, I'm coming more from a screenwriting thing. I would love to be a novelist, but I can't figure out how to, if it's two different worlds.
Yeah,
With me, I'll look for stories, and when I could come up with a good log line, then I think, okay, who's the character? And I build the character after that because that's the most important thing to me. A strong log line that I can always go back to, then I start adding more and more. I'm
yeah,
very tact I try to keep writing like a 9 to 5 job. Like, I'll say, okay, today I'm writing from 2 o'clock till four o'clock. If I'm in the middle of outlining and it strikes 4 o'clock, I won't finish the word. I'll just put it down. Okay, I'm done. Because
Wow.
when you make it a regiment like that, it trains your mind. You adapt more. And you think, how can I do all of this?
Mhm.
I agree. I mean, and that's what I kind of said before, even myself, we are very similar. It's discipline. You got to
It's
carve
an
out
East
that.
Coast thing, I think.
Yeah, I think so. That's us.
It's a
It's
tri no, it's a tri-state area way of thinking.
a tri-state area way of writing. We kind of block out the time that you want to write. You sit down to give it your best effort. Yes, I mean, I have a stop time. It's not a hard stop time for me, but I also know that, I'm definitely guilty of maybe staying in it longer than I potentially wanted it to be. And then maybe that will dilute some of the work ethic that's there. So there is also something to be said about I only have 2.5 hours today, so let me try to get the best 2.5 hours in. But I think more than the length of time or the duration of time is the ability to keep on doing this day in and day out. Is to set that schedule like no different than any other job.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. And I know myself, if I don't have that room that of chaos that inspires me to write, like I'm just not going to write.
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
I need to be involved in that ambience in that room. So like Eric, where do you write where you are right now? Is that your writing
Yeah.
cave?
Yeah. A lot of times here and again with me, it always starts with pen and paper. Then I move. My writing process is this: pen and paper in my room, or I'll go out to, eat or something. I'll bring my notebook. I get all my messy thoughts on down there. Then I move on to my iPod where I'll do it more. Then I go to the index cards that end up here, then back to pen and paper. But I remember in Stephen King's book on writing, if you've ever read that, he talked about how as a writer you need to have a specific room that you go to write, or a specific chair
Yeah,
that's, your reading or writing chair where you're most comfortable and all of that. But again, I'll admit I have been guilty of being that D-bag screenwriter who brings his laptop to the coffee shop and starts typing his screenplay, especially when I was in LA. I won't deny that. I've done that.
yeah,
That's cool. That's very cool. And I think there's a lesson here for not just writers, for all creatives, because as we know, may or may not know, creatives have numerous jobs. They have their day job and then they have their creative job. And it doesn't matter how many day jobs you have to not only set aside time, but you have to sometimes force yourself to
Yeah.
sit down
Yeah.
and do it. And from what it sounds like, because obviously I edit and shoot and stuff, and shooting's easy. It's the editing and like the sound design, because you can get really bogged down, and you do. Whether you're a writer, a screenplay, a song, a novel, anything, you guys, everybody, I think, has to step away. They have to be self-disciplined enough to sit and do it. And yes, take your computer. I take my computer all the time to like local, like a little coffee shop, and sit and do graphics and whatever else I have to do. But 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 you have to set aside and you have to be disciplined, and you have to do it yourself. You
Yeah.
have to you have to be disciplined yourself, because if you live with a roommate, if you live with a girlfriend, a wife, a boyfriend, whatever you live with, there even your dog ain't gonna look unless it's unless it's Rogers looking,
Yeah.
because Eric has Rogers, and like your little dog looks at you and they're like, "Hey, are you gonna work today?"
Well,
Right? They're not gonna
he
do that.
judges me for not working, the
I
jerk.
know, right? Yes, he does.
Like, really? You're playing video games now?
Uh-huh. He goes,
You
I
know, there's a
thought.
lot of stuff I want on Chewy. You gotta start selling stuff, dear buddy.
Exactly. But you really have to, this has to be about you, because it has to be about you and your project and what you want to get done. And then obviously when you go and work with other people, you get all these other people involved. But to start, nobody's gonna sit and hold your hand and be like, "Oh, you don't feel good today? Well, snap out of it. Get working." They're not gonna do that. You have to do. Um, what's this? This is your first book, right,
Yeah.
Eric?
That's my first novel. Yes. Correct.
What's it been like for you to go through this process? And obviously as a filmmaker, it's very visual. And is it the same process, or what did you feel like when you finished your film as opposed to this book? Was there any difference?
I mean, look, as you know, as we discussed, screenwriting, screenplays, and novels are two distinctly different areas to write. As a matter of fact, I'm writing the screenplay now to this book, and it's very difficult to do. You kind of take all of that that's out there and kind of bring it down, very segmented, very disciplined, what could be your camera
Yeah.
angles, your shots,
Mhm.
interiors, exteriors, so on and so forth, and the dialogues itself. You just can't get as descriptive as you can in novels. And, I think a good screenplay could be what, 70 to 80 pages, and a good novel could be 400, right? So you're literally just
Yeah.
compacting all the way down. Um, and so, there is a distinct difference, but I think it's the maybe it's more geared towards the editing part where where the whole movie starts to come together, right? Where the edits are being done, the music is added, the tracks are put in. You're working on scene versus scene to make sure that everything is flowing correctly, and then when you come out with that movie, you are kind of coming out with what I would envision the way it was from when I finished my novel. It was there.
Yeah.
Everything was completed. Everything kind of made sense. It transitioned one into the next. My dialogue was there. My cast of characters were well represented. My scenes were well described. So it's again, it's maybe with filmmaking, the difference is, especially with the scenes, you're showing that all visually, and
Mhm.
in screenwriting, you have to be descriptive enough that people can create that visual within their mind.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so you have to be very, very cognizant of that. But I think at the end of the day, it's almost one and the same. So to answer your question, yeah, when I finished the book, I did have that same sense of accomplishment as when I finished the film. It was like, this is a big, huge, heady task. The only difference is that with the film, it incorporates so many people, right? There's so many people to do. There's so many things to answer for. There's so many people that are, involved. Even if it's a small independent film, there's still a good handful of people that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to rely on involved. And when you're writing, especially in a novel, it's just you. and you only have you to answer to,
Yeah.
nobody else to, and that could be very, I think, frightening for some people, but if you're like me, who doesn't mind to be alone, who doesn't mind to take his thoughts and to get into them, it's a great space to be in, but it's certainly not for everybody.
Yeah. 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 That's very true. And
One of the biggest differences you'll learn with screenwriting and, novel writing is when it comes to a novel, you have no budget. You can just sit there and write spaceship. If
good
I
point.
send Larry a
Yeah.
script that's, interior spaceship, he'll call me going, "What the hell is wrong with you?
We don't,
Spaceship?
we don't have the budget for
The
that.
hell, man?"
All right, so your creativity is constrained to budget.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's
Yep.
different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Well,
difficult.
this is a
Very
question.
different.
I find that when limiting yourself as a creative forces you to be more creative, because when you
Hmm.
can do anything you want, it's your mind's wondering, what do I do? But when you say, this is my limitation and I have to work within this box, it helps you a lot.
Hmm.
It does, and I agree with you. It does definitely help you become even more creative because even in writing my novel, unlike a superhero who can have unlimited powers and do unlimited things, and there's no right or wrong. They just have what they have, and it could be as, grandiose as you want it to be. It's a superhero. But when you're writing about a real person, who's got real issues and flaws and things that go on, you have to make sure that you're constrained to what would normally happen in a person's life or their mind. You're not writing about fantasy. It's real. And so it is kind of constricted down to making sure that you don't lose the audience by putting something in there that, can't be true, and so that bit of discipline helps you, definitely fire up your creativity.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I do absolutely agree with that. And um, I didn't put this in our because we send our introduction email to you to our guests. Didn't put this in there. And I don't mean to spring this on you, but would you happen to have your book in front of you by chance?
I do have the book. Do I have the book in front of me? Let's just see. Uh,
Okay.
no,
And
I
and
don't
while
have it.
you
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. I have it downstairs, like.
Okay, so Eric is back with a copy of the book and he is going to read part of it for us.
Okay, this is chapter 15. It's called High Hopes, takes place in Long Island, New York, circa 1975. It was the Jewish high holidays, and like our traditional nomad ancestors, this meant a trip was necessary. Our trips consisted of taking a 2-hour car ride to visit our relatives in rural Connecticut. My father was the son of a town's pharmacist, and all his side of his family still lived up there in the East Coast. Incidentally, my papa's name was Paul, and my dad spent his adolescence working behind the register of the family drugstore. My dad would often wax poetic about how much he hated the work, the long hours, and the old people who were constantly asking for drug advice or to find something amongst the stock shelves. He did, however, confide in me later in life that there were certain perks to the job, as he had access to pocket some Valium, Quaaludes, cigarettes, and of course condoms for any of his friends. Even though he hated the work, he became something of kind of a celebrity drug dealer among his small group of friends in rural Connecticut. I once asked my Papa Paul before he passed if he knew my dad was stealing drugs from the store. He would
Oh,
smile, wink, and say that he was glad that he didn't steal the cash instead. I guess he had a point, and although I wouldn't pass my old man to pocket some 20s if the situation presented itself, I remember my Papa Paul as a jolly man, a good-hearted man with an infectious laugh. He was also a modest man with limited means compared to my Grandpa Butch. But he made up for that with always giving us kids presents and filling the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant with candy and toys that he obviously taken from the drugstore.
Nice. Very
wow.
cool.
I like
Very
that.
cool. I should have asked you before you started reading, what song should we put on before to listen to that? For
So
your Spotify playlist.
for my Spotify playlist, so that is chapter 15. And chapter 15 is High Hopes. That's from a band called the Gorilla Biscuits off the Gorilla Biscuits album in
Great band.
1988 it came out. So you'll
That's
see I have
cool.
all my acknowledgments here, which is all the music in each of the. So you can actually see the chapter in the back, understand the chapter, get the name of the song, get the album it's from. So I put that all in my acknowledgments in the book as well.
That is absolutely super. Man, you really thought of everything. And I think because, and not because you're a filmmaker, but you're a creative in general, I think that you took, it's not an extra step when you're just like playing around. You're like, I'm gonna do this, but those things, I think they kind of matter to people because that's just a brilliant idea that you put it in the acknowledgments, and people can go look and go, okay, wait. Let me go to Spotify.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, what? Chapter one? Okay, good. Okay. All right, ready? Go. And you
But
just read it and you get the flavor of it, right?
yeah, I did the whole soundtrack. There's a Thank God for the Sinners Spotify soundtrack on
Yeah.
Spotify. You can get the
Yeah.
whole thing right there.
Yes.
So yeah, again, you
Yes.
can read the book, you can imagine the book, you can sing along with the book. Yeah, I tried to think of everything I could creatively to kind of really, engross the reader into the full experience of what I was trying to get through.
Man, I love that. I
That's
love that.
awesome.
Eric, you are absolutely like top notch, man.
Yeah, man.
Like I okay, so I know punk rock because of Guns N' Roses, right?
Yeah,
And they're influenced by a lot of punk rock. And I know them, and like looking at your Spotify playlist and knowing that you grew up in the heart of punk rock during the heyday of
yeah.
punk rock. I dare I ask if you know any punk rockers, man, that you've met, and I'm sure you have. That's probably a whole nother,
That's a
that's a
whole
whole
nother.
nother
I met a
show.
whole bunch, but I do want to read you my dedication because
Oh
I think
yes,
that's really
please.
so. I want to read you my dedication. This will kind of sum everything together.
Yes.
This book is dedicated to the unnamed teenager, the one with the shaved head, the punk who hit me square between the eyes at my first show. It was the Dead Kennedys at Irving Plaza, and I was enthralled by the ensuing chaos. You must have seen the innocence on my face as I stood outside the mosh pit. Or maybe it was the fear that you recognized as I contemplated about joining the mosh. You came at me from across the room and flat out punched me in the face. My legs trembled as I hit the floor, barely able to breathe. I was trampled on as I fought to regain my senses. A few took pity on me and lifted me back up again. I looked for you, but never got a good look as to where you went. I wanted to thank you for the beating, for showing me what being a punk was all about.
I
Wow.
and that is the perfect way to end the show. Um, Eric, thank you
Yes,
so much. It
you're
was an
welcome, guys.
absolute, and this is again the beginning of a great friendship. I know we're going to
Yes.
have you back on, whether it be to talk about the book or just to talk about music and stuff like that, because,
Whenever you want. And just wanted to also give
yeah.
you a side note, really exciting. In the past month, the book, Thank God for the Sinners, has just won its second book festival.
Oh, wow.
So we won two
Wow.
festivals this past month. We won the New York Book Festival for the best book in horror. And then last week, I just won the 2025 New York City Big Book Award for Distinguished Favorite Book in Thrillers. So
That's
we're on a
awesome.
roll. We're getting
Wow.
there. And it's been a real exciting time.
Wow, congratulations. Absolutely
Congratulations,
a
man.
big giant congrat on everything, man. Keep up the good work. Keep up the creativity. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you. And before you say it, Eric, your Spotify playlist will be in the description.
Yes,
But go
definitely.
ahead, Eric. Wrap us out and thank you.
All of
Thank you, Eric.
Eric's links will be in the description of the show. Eric, thank you so much for coming on. And like we say each and every week, folks, remember, support New Life Village.